Good evening, everybody. It is 5:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in gray and quite autumnal Brooklyn, New York. My name is Max Cohen. After a couple weeks, we are back with another episode of the MOCA Live podcast. I'm very excited to be here. No Colborn today, just myself, but that's okay because we have a fantastic guest. And let's just get right into it. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the show for the first time, and you'll have to correct me if I get these titles wrong, the conceptual artist,
Yeah, sure.
AI specialist, quite brilliant writer. That's Mr. Kevin Esherick, whose work I became familiar with after reading Generative Anesthetics, a eulogy for digital art, and perhaps responding to it. Anyways, Kevin, thanks so much for coming on the show. Happy to have you. What's up?
Appreciate it. Yeah, you actually, I thought you were gonna, you were worried about the name pronunciation, which you actually nailed, Esherick.
Yeah,
A lot of people
I'm pretty
do like
good.
Sherrick, people misspell it. Yeah, you
I have my
that.
moments of brilliance and inspiration. You'll apologize.
Yeah.
The cat is apologize for the cat that
Oh
is
no
rummaging
problem.
around
It
the room.
looks just like my girlfriend's cats, so I'm kind of immediately endeared to it.
Yeah, he's bad luck, and
Oh,
it's his season. So
are you saying you're here in Brooklyn as well, or did you just
yeah,
know where I'm at? And, oh,
no,
sick.
no,
Okay.
I'm in Brooklyn, beautiful Prospect Lefferts Gardens. For all of those
Okay,
listening who
tight.
might know where the hell that is, even though most people in New York don't even know where that is.
Yeah, I'll need to talk to you more about that after the show then.
That
I'm here
sounds
as well.
great.
I'm up in Williamsburg, so not too
We'll
far
chit
away.
chat. For
Although
now,
Teak is
yeah,
AI specialist is not a fair. I've done nothing to earn that title.
yeah.
AI dilettante explorer, maybe trying my best to learn.
Well, what makes somebody an AI specialist versus otherwise? I mean, certainly compared to
Yeah,
lay
I guess
people
it
who've
depends.
made
Like,
AI art projects.
yeah, within the field of AI art, maybe I'll accept that. I guess I just tend to think of like technical specialists, like, the engineers at OpenAI doing that stuff, because I do like try my hand at things along those lines, and like and learning how to actually build models from scratch and things like that. And on along that axis, I'm nowhere near a specialist. Within AI art, I have my own little niche of things that I know pretty well. But yeah, out here
Perhaps,
fucking
yeah,
around
perhaps AI
exploring.
enthusiast is a better terminology.
Sure. Yeah,
It's kind of a catch-all.
I'll take that
So,
one.
outside of AI, which I want to return to a little bit later, we have a lot to talk to today because you are in, I think, what is a pretty small category of conceptual artists working in crypto art, which makes sense because I think that internet communication isn't always
Mhm.
the best medium for getting people invested in
Yeah.
deeper conceptual explorations and also like actually pulling them off and executing them. So, like, I mean, just right off the bat, because you not only are a conceptual artist, but like I said, you're a quite prolific writer. You have interviews and you have also these essays, which is how I became
Thanks,
familiar
man.
with your work. And like, you know, you have a number of these mediums. Some of them are concrete and some of them are abstract. And I'm curious, like, when an idea grabs you or when a concept grabs you, do you kind of know, like, right away what form it prefers to take shape in? Does something point to you and say, like, okay, I want to be an
Hmm.
essay or I want to be an art project? And kind of, can you help me like understand like how
Yeah.
the idea unpacks itself?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say there are kind of like these two different modes or realms that my mind occupies on that front. There's just kind of like the abstract idea realm, um, where I'm thinking about things, and it's mostly in terms of like words and uh, concepts, and it it doesn't touch art yet, and
Mhm.
that's just kind of like this latent area that my mind is inhabiting at all times as I'm thinking, writing, taking notes, just like what I'm spending um, any of my down moments of my day doing is just kind of like thinking about things. Um, and then so that like exists and is kind of like unpotentiated. It hasn't
Interesting.
manifested in terms of an essay or an art piece. Um, I'd say like the bridge from that to an essay is closer because those words are more what I'm thinking in terms of. Um, uh, but then there's this like secondary space where I hold ideas as objects, as things, as images. And that requires this like typically there's like something I've been thinking about in that prior abstract space, and then it like makes its leap. There's like this kind of flash of lightning, this like potentiation shift between those two realms where an idea jumps from an abstraction to something concrete. And so like in the case of a project like material, a work I have that involves um, a lot, but it involves a pair of jeans that I wear, and when I have like memorable, meaningful, compelling experiences with my life, people add to them in real time, and it's intended to be a meditation on like the phenomenon of life as an aesthetic experience.
Mm.
That last part was something I had been thinking about for a long time, like through what lens should we view life? Like how do we take good experiences, bad experiences, and view them as material for meaning in our lives, for the creative endeavor? Um, how uh, how does it actually end up at times having a negative effect on us? For example, I think there's a tendency, especially among artists, to like seek challenging experiences.
Mhm.
Um, with the idea that like this will be good material one day.
Sure.
It'll be good fodder for art. And so those were things I had thought about a lot, especially like in the wake of some difficult experiences in my life, which we'll probably get into later because it's tied to a project I'm working on now. But um, they eventually just like catalyzed into this material, no pun intended, form. So like the ideas were there, and then they make that leap
Sure.
into a concrete form.
You were just reminding me of
Yeah,
something. I don't know if you've ever seen New York Stories. It's like an anthology movie from I think the late '80s, but there's this like segment of it is Scorsese directed it with Nick Nolte. And it's about this
oh,
artist who
cool.
is in this terrible abusive relationship, and it's like he can't work and it's ruining his professional life. And by the end, you find out that it's this cycle that he puts himself in of continuously like
Mm,
getting into these toxic relationships that arrest his work and fill him with hate, self-hatred, and self-doubt, so that he can then have this creative explosion after the fact. I
yeah,
guess I never really thought of that as true to life until you just started talking about
I
artists
think it
seeking out
is.
experiences like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in extreme cases, like it does happen deliberately like that, but I think far more often it's in a like subtle and intentional but not explicitly so thing where we've constructed these archetypes around like what it means to be an artist, and we kind of quietly find ourselves living into these things. But um yeah, I think like right now like personal struggle and like mental health issues and stuff have kind of been tokenized as like a kind of virtue that one can signal. And so there's
Mhm.
like this, um, like Nietzsche would have put it as like slave morality. There's this like economy of suffering that we kind of compete on within our society. And for artists, that's like especially important. We look to them as our people who like transmute and make suffering meaningful. And um, yeah, even if they're not like explicitly thinking, oh, time to, go get committed to the hospital or something like that. I think
Yeah.
these things weigh on us and kind of seduce us uh, in more subtle ways. Yeah, and
There's a great
my
like in
project Artist Bingo.
yeah. Oh yeah, artist bingo. I want to talk to you about that in a moment because I think that's a perfect distillation of what we were just talking about. But I just wanted to say there's a criminally underread piece by the Dada founders, Judy Mam and Bea Ramos, from like early crypto art, basically taking on this idea of like the starving artist or the struggling artist as
Hmm.
like unnecessary and harmful, and like using specifically the concept of like underlying royalties for crypto art as a way to fight back against this need to I don't know, see ourselves and also see each other as like perpetually struggling to survive, and that there's some kind of
Yeah,
like nobility in that, which is probably, um, the what was the
yeah,
terminology used by Nietzsche? The slave morality.
yeah. And his was very historical, and like in he goes through like this kind of historical development of it, like citing Christianity as the birth of that, where like uh, they took virtues that were like, or things that were not traditionally construed as virtues, and flipped them on their head, and took them as such, like things that were true of like the weak and those who were put down, and they said no, like being meek and humble is a virtue. And so they sort of like flipped this paradigm where now those who are subjugated could come to power on their own terms, and then that ended up being like the development of the Western world in many ways. Yeah, I don't know what exactly contemporary anthropology says on the
Nor do I.
historicity of those developments, but yeah, it's at least food for thought, and I think interesting, and holds up in ways that are true, if not exactly factual.
Well, let's
Send
hang
me
on
that
this for a
piece.
second. Yeah, I want to hang on this for a second with like the artist bingo, which, and I'll try and describe it, and you should probably correct me as I do things wrong. But you
Okay.
had released as a project. It was a number of iterative like bingo cards, and each one has like different a number. I don't know if it was 25 squares or what, but it was a number of
Yep,
squares.
25 total with
tw-
one free space.
25 total squares, just your garden variety bingo square, but each one is a randomly generated assortment of, um, I guess, various activities or life paths that you would take. And based on your just continued, I think unintentional is a word to use, some word to describe that, your like unintentional filling of this bingo card, people would, quote unquote win. And I think you would win like a physical. But as we're talking about, the project seemed at least in some way to be about
Yeah,
this, like these kinds of archetypal lives that we live as artists, or that we are drawn to live as artists. And I think this is really
yeah,
interesting
totally.
based on what we were talking about earlier of like the essay versus the art piece, right? Obviously you have this concept, you have this kind of idea. I know you called it a lightning flash, but this idea of like how artists live their lives and the archetypes in which they live. And there's really two ways to go about that, right? You can add something to the dialectic by creating an art piece that confronts this, or you can do kind of what you did with like generative anesthetics, this digital or generative art essay, where you're kind of cataloging other people's
Yeah.
contributions to the conversation. And I'm curious, like being, or I guess having filled both of those shoes simultaneously for different conversations, what is the pull for you towards, again, like contributing to the conversation directly by creating a data point
Hmm.
within this, not to reduce it to a data point, as opposed to being the chronicler of the data points of others?
Yeah. I mean, well, so with generative anesthetics, it's funny because I actually did also create two art pieces around the same idea.
Mhm.
I actually went that route first, and it's funny you used the term cataloging. I released a collection at the end of last year called Catalog, that
Mhm.
was intended as a critique of some of the things that I ended up pointing out in the generative anesthetics essay. So it was a generative art collection critiquing the state of generative art. It was a very short 8 lines of JavaScript that forwarded you to a random product image URL on Costco's image servers. And so each piece is
Sure.
just a random, sterile, totally banal, mass produced consumer good. Um, and then I created DVD Screensaver a few months later, which is the classic bouncing DVD screensaver logo that everyone now knows to like await hitting in the corner.
Mhm.
And
Does
that
yours?
was, yeah, I've watched it happen. If you sit there long enough, it's gonna happen. And so developing that for however many hours, I saw it quite a few times. I actually tried to see if there was a way that I could make it never hit the corner.
I was gonna say that'd be
without
fucked
doing
up.
anything really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not tell anyone. I was thinking about doing that, but without doing anything like crazy, like having uh, the DVD logo move in like weird arc patterns or anything. It's pretty difficult to happen because it's going to be rendering on different screens. So there's no real way to like have the size of it relate to the shape on a consistent basis and still be able to predict that it won't happen. Anyways, that was supposed to be a commentary on like personalized infinite media and having our eyes forever glued to the screen. So I took a stab at doing it on the art front as well as the writing front for that in particular. But to actually answer your question, like when do I decide to go the art route? When do I decide to write it out? I don't really know. It's just kind of like whenever that lightning strike happens. If an idea crystallizes, then like, and it's good and it's been sitting with me for some time, then like, yeah, I rip it.
Sure.
I tend not to like work on projects that I haven't been sitting on for at least like 6 months or something like that. That tends to be my litmus test for like, is this a really good idea? With writing, like I just love writing. I hate it too, but I love it.
I'm glad you said that.
And it's the worst, but like it's also like so beautiful and yeah, one of my favorite activities, especially if I can make a habit of it right now, which I largely haven't been able to do due to just art mostly dominating my life at the moment. But yeah, so when I have opportunities to do it and I have something that's really been nagging me, then I go ahead with it. I really don't feel like I can say with it though, like how I prioritize one thing or another. I have notes for, dozens of essays sitting around and like why this one was the one I went with most recently or the Manglecore piece before that. Yeah, I mean, art essays, if I have like a really strong thesis, something I'm feeling and it feels timely, which it did with both of those things. I mean, the generative anesthetics one like felt late, and I was getting to the point where I was almost no longer going to release it because I had started taking notes for it like a year and a half prior, which is when I wanted to write it, like late 2022 or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. The writing process is mysterious to me. I think
Well,
my answer to that.
It's interesting, this dichotomy, right, between what is essentially, and especially being that you have like explored similar realms both in writing and conceptual art, because they're more, I think, linked experientially than they appear on the surface, because the generative anesthetics was almost 7,000 words, right? And any of your kind of all the conceptual works that we've talked about and the ones that we will talk about, artist bingo or like the artist is absent, where you kind of need to like know you intimately and also kind of follow you and be prepared for a lengthy time investment. Like that's the same on both sides, right? You're not creating art that is simply like experience or like experience and react, where it's like very kind of momentary. Not to say that the works can't have deeper meaning, but that they're and aesthetics in a frame that you're supposed to look at and then get something from. It's like thoughts that you're supposed to dwell on or that you want to kind of like ponder, interrogate, open up a conversation for. And again, both of these things, whether it's the essay that demands 30 to 45 minutes of someone's time straight through, or a conceptual artwork which requires like continuously returning to you and what you're saying and what you're doing and how the project is unraveling, like they require the same investment of time, effort, energy, and attention from an audience, that whether it's crypto art specific, whether it's just the year 2024, whether it's the internet, like artwork that's on the internet in any kind, like is rare. So like, how do you convince an audience to build that kind of long-term relationship with you and your work? And is it maybe you would have an answer, maybe you don't. Maybe it's different for
Yeah.
the art versus the essaying, but they're, I think, kind of conceptually linked in that sense.
Yeah. I have like a borderline pathological level of ambition to do like something meaningful and lasting with my life. And I think the most lasting things like come when a great amount of effort is poured into them. It's like we have a very fast information economy right now, and the life cycles of things are so quick, and things are made quickly, things go out of fashion quickly. And I think if you take the time to like really craft and imbue something with meaning, then it stands a far greater chance of standing the test of time. And yeah, that's what I've felt called to traffic in. I want to make things that are going to hold up and matter to people for a long time to come. And fortunately, I have the patience, and I'm not like saying that in this like self-congratulatory way. Like it genuinely is like really difficult being online and staying focused on things right now. And I just kind of like naturally have good levels of focus and motivation and anti-ADHD basically that allow me to like stick with stuff. But in terms of getting people to come on that journey with you, when they have so much else to look at and swipe their thumbs at and whatnot, you need to be pithy. You need to distill both the idea down to its simplest form, in a way that's really crisp and makes intuitive sense to people. And your explanation of it needs to be as pithy as possible, and then the way you communicate it and reach out to people about it. With artist bingo, for example, like turning my life and career as an artist into a game of bingo, like that's pretty tight as a concept. People can pick up on it pretty quick. They hear that, see one of the cards, and they tend to be like, oh, okay, I get it. A little more explaining helps once you've caught their ear, but staying concise, explaining these are dynamic generative bingo cards. Every time I complete one of these actions, for example, work acquired by Museum of Crypto Art, then that gets updated on chain, and everyone who collects that gets a stamp on their card. Being pithy, being persistent. So yeah, you need to be committed to the long term if you want ideas that you believe in long term and acknowledge take some time for people to really grasp. If you want that to happen, then you're going to need to stick with them and kind of keep drilling it into people, because denser ideas, like, people may not, fully grasp in the 15 seconds that they read your tweet. But if they see a series of 10 tweets over 10 weeks from you about it, and they capture it from a different angle every time, it starts to sink in.
Well, I want to just hang there for a second. Like, how much is
Mhm.
too much when it comes to discussing the concepts at the core of a work, right? Like, can you over explain something to death
Totally.
where it takes away the mystery, or I don't know, kind of muddies the personal relationship with the concept that somebody coming across it might have?
Yeah.
Or is it always more information the better?
No, definitely not. And I really want people to know what I mean, so I'm like at risk of over explaining, definitely. I mean, it's the same as being a good writer. It's like, say what you need to say and no more. There's that classic quote from, I forget what writer it was, or maybe even a politician. But if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. That, like, great writing consists so much in concision. Great art, the same is true, even if it's the writing about the art.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
Yes, exactly. And wit, I think, is instrumental to conceptual art. Like, I want conceptual art to be funny. artist bingo is hopefully funny at points if you read through some of the tropes listed out there. So yeah, you totally can over explain. I mean, just from like a pure like pragmatic perspective, if you want people to connect with something, droning on and on about it is not going to be the way to get them to do that. You say what needs to be said, and then maybe if they've decided to engage their attention with you further, you give, you know, whatever next needs to be said, but little to nothing more. Also, on the note of just
Yeah.
connecting with people, because I think this is important, or getting people to engage with your work long term like that. Pithy, persistent, and you need to be personal. You need to develop relationships. You know, relationships are one of the things that, like, one of the like projects of sorts that most naturally like have a long-term time span for us.
Sure.
And so if you want people to keep listening to you over a long time span, maintain a relationship with them, make friends, like find people who believe in what you believe and invest in those relationships, reach out, say happy birthday, go to their events. Maybe not the recipe you're used to hearing for what constitutes good conceptual art, but in this, yeah, like fast-paced media environment, if you want to do something that like has real heft to it, then you need listeners who
Yeah.
are going to stick with you and have the patience to pick up on that over time. And most people won't give a shit unless they're your
Regardless.
friends. And then eventually you build up, you know, a gravitas around your work, and people who don't know you personally may start taking what you do seriously.
I want to take this
takes some
concept and
time.
apply it to AI, because you're at least an AI enthusiast, as I consider myself. And I think the rules are a
Yeah.
little bit different there, especially when we consider how lay people view AI artwork in general, right? Either with distance or with revulsion, kind of off the bat.
Hmm.
And it seems to me that the further we get down this kind of AI artistry pipeline, the more that over explication becomes necessary. It feels to me, rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure, but it feels to me like the artists working with AI who are able to either cross the divide of the effort they're putting into their work towards recognition for the effort they're putting into their work are those who are able to explain with as much complexity as possible, not just their processes and all the tools they use and the data setting and fine tuning and training and retraining, et cetera, they use, but all of the conceptual underpinnings that go
Yeah.
into an AI art project. And it is almost like to set oneself apart from this conceptual idea. I think a lot of people, even within crypto art, have of AI art as this simple, quick prompt generation exercise that you over explain everything. You completely hold someone's hand so that they can see every little step that you took. Oh, like this person, this artist, this group did take all of the necessary steps to create a conceptual backbone, to create a
Yeah.
novel aesthetic process. Like, do you think that there's any truth to that?
Yeah, I do. I think there's still a balance to be had, and you can go too far. And if you're getting into the technical details of like the loss rate that you're using as you're fine
Sure.
tuning a model, like you're going to lose the vast majority of people.
Mhm.
Saying that you trained your own model, like probably good within our ecosystem. That's like language that most people kind of have an idea of, and to them it signals like, okay, you did something above and beyond than just taking the prepackaged model and pooping out images from it.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's again like saying what you need to say and nothing more. But with this kind of work, because there is the risk that you've created an image with nothing, with very little effort by just typing in a prompt, and people don't want that out of artwork, and that isn't really like wherein art lies for us. You do need to do some explaining. So the what you need to say is probably more substantial than it would be for kinds of work prior to this, because so much of art like rests in the like the communication of intentionality around a work, the understanding that like there is meaning being poured into this object. Ted Chiang's recent essay, which I didn't like, got into this some. I think he was like going in the right direction with some things when he talks about his basic thing was like AI art is kind of shit, and it's not real art. That's sort of what it amounted to. But his line of reasoning was like sort of in the right direction. He talks about art being constituted by choices. There's some truth to this. Like painting, we see brush strokes. In each of those, there is a choice. Chang failed to recognize there can be plentiful choices in an AI artwork, and also failed to recognize that like no matter what the artwork or medium is, there's always going to be like some degrees of freedom. Like the artist doesn't have complete control over anything. If basically every artist I know has like at some point talked about a happy accident in artwork of theirs, and that accident didn't make it not art. No one's thinking that. No one's. I mean, like, you really think Pollock controlled every, like, obviously he wielded his paint buckets and brushes masterfully to create his drip paintings, but there's an indeterminacy there in the way the paint then spreads as it hits the canvas.
Well, that's key to so much literature too. Like James Joyce famously said about Ulysses, that he'd put enough puzzles in there to frustrate scholars for the next 100 years. And just by saying that, it meant that scholars would be poring over every happy accident, of which I have to imagine there were many thousands in his dense, lengthy novel. And all of them would be treated with the same reverence and now it's impossible to tell what was intentional and what was just, the same word appearing on 3 different pages, 100 pages, or the same word appearing 3 different times on pages, all 100 pages apart, as if there was some. Anyways, you were saying.
Oh, interesting. Is that a real factotum from Ulysses?
I don't know about that specifically, but I know that Joyce definitely said that he was going to frustrate the scholars for 100 years. That would be, I'm sure that something along those lines exists in there.
Yeah, and so what those scholars are doing is like looking for this intentionality. They're looking for the way that Joyce buried meaning into the text, and it accrues greater and greater status as a work of art as more of that is mined from it. And so we do need ways with AI art of demonstrating our intentionality. Chang missed that plenty of choices can go into an AI artwork. He also missed just like that really the lone choice of whether a thing is in artwork or not, as like Duchamp kind of paved the way for, is enough to constitute art, whether it be good art or not. I'm not going to weigh in on at the moment, but yes, you need to show intentionality. Painting does it through the composition of the work. You can see the brush strokes. Sculpture, similarly. I mean, up until now, when we have like machines that can sculpt things, but even then, like every curve and contour was designed by someone, with models that can suddenly produce images from nothing, or from 3 words, a button click, whatever. Much less intentionality is revealed through the composition of a work. And so we do, either through craft or concept, need to demonstrate where that intentionality lies. You have someone like Ropa, whose artworks have like, I don't know what someone unfamiliar with these AI models thinks when they see them, but like, to me, having worked with image generation a lot, it's clear to me that there's a craft going on there, that he's done a great amount of work, like in his Life in West America series, to produce these images. Like Stable Diffusion isn't just crapping that out. That takes an intensive iterative feedback loop, and a lot of just hand work on his part, the same way any other artwork would. So that's evidence of craft there. For some who aren't familiar with the medium, there's the medium literacy matters, because some people may not understand that actually took work, and helping people, either having the right audience who knows that those decisions were at play is important, or using then your explanation around the work to convey the level of craft that goes into it is important. But
Sure.
It's finding the right balance of those things for your audience. And a lot of people currently are outside that AI art audience. And sorry, I think someone's fighting in front of my apartment.
That's Brooklyn.
And then the alternative to that is conceptuality. Like if you can show through a work that a great deal of thought went into it, and even if the image is superfluous, or not superfluous, but like didn't require craft and like individual decisions to make in and of itself, then you're going to need some rich concept that shows like this person thought about this thing, this person embedded this object with meaning. My last collection in utero, I think, is a good example of this. I did no hand retouching on any of the images. Each one of them is a zero shot image, or taken straight from an AI model, where the concept was to peer inside the mind of a model and posit what an AI's consciousness might look like. And so it evidences its own concept, but there was no actual like handcrafting of the image. That being said, there was a kind of craft at another level. I generated somewhere between 10 and 20,000 images for that, and then brought that down to 53 in the end. And there was a lot of like prompt maneuvering to produce beautiful images that I felt sufficed for the final collection. That's a roundabout answer, but
no, I think
got
it's
to
a
work
good
on
answer.
the pithy bit that I've been preaching.
No, this is not a pithy podcast. This is a lengthy and involved podcast, but
Okay.
It's an interesting line of thinking, and it's especially interesting. And I wanted to talk to you about this in the first place. The essay you wrote on Mangocore and the Strangeness of Aesthetics, which is essentially like a celebration or a delineation of this kind of like stilted, nonsensical, horrifying, like early AI aesthetic that I think we still see generated quite often. It's interesting to think about that as its own kind of buttress against claims of AI doing the work for an artist, like by including these elements that are specifically unreal in a way that is very specific to AI. That's almost a tacit communication in and of itself, that one is using their own model, that one is not using these kind of like very polished, very homogenous, I would even say it in some places like stylistically anesthetized models that are kind of like mainstream mass adoption, the Dallys, I don't know if Claude does image generation, but certainly like the Midjourneys, right? Where it's very much about straight lines, photorealism, like getting to the essence of a thing. And these Mangocore aesthetics are an almost unintentional response to that. They are purposefully messed up in a way that you kind of at this point can only get if you are doing the work. I don't know. I'm not sure what the parallel is there, but it just seems like there's something pregnant in that kind of relationship.
Yeah, you either at this point need to revert to older models, which they're around, they're online. Runway, who produced or provided the Stable Diffusion 1.5 model that a lot of this work was done on, actually just took that model down from the internet, which was kind of scary for a lot of AI artists, I think, because a lot of this stuff has been like promoted as free and open source and stuff, and all of a sudden like that was like one of the watershed moment models right there, and it's gone all of a sudden, and Runway is becoming like a for profit, or I think they're always for profit. They're like a unicorn or something, but they're like closing off access to the model.
Sure.
Fortunately, like other people, like I have it saved locally on my machine. Other people do too, and so they've re-uploaded copies to Hugging Face. But like where these seemed like abundant at one point, they're maybe becoming scarce, and they'll become like files from the 90s or web pages that like now have become really tough to track down and just exist on someone's hard drive somewhere. So there's an interesting conversation around like stewardship and conservation there. Maybe we need to get Regina Harsani in the room for that. She'd have thoughts, I'm sure. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah, these models, you can no longer really get the Mangle core aesthetic with any like current model. Flux,
Sure.
Stable Diffusion 3, Midjourney, none of that is going to look like that. So to produce that now, you're working with a retrograde technology and doing something deliberate. In 2022, that was like all we had. It was like we were working with like DALL-E 1 through the Crayon web app or whatever, and everything looked horrific, and it was kind of fun and cool. And yeah, even into some of like the Stable Diffusion 1.5 stuff. I don't know if there was a question there in the first place, or if we were just sort of
I rarely end with like more just ambient thoughts.
Cool.
But I want to make sure we have time to talk about I'm With You, which is a project you announced today with Tender Art. And I, of course, I want to give you a chance to talk about project and what it means to you, et cetera. But kind of before we jump into like what the project is, because I was kind of thinking about questions for this conversation before this morning when you had kind of announced the
sorry to drop the
meaning
bomb
of the thing. No, but you had said in like this initial announcement, like it's unlike anything you've presented before. And I was just thinking, like, you've worked with some really high-minded concepts, some really like deep philosophical concepts. What does it mean to be conscious? Whether your life is archetypal. And I'm curious, I know you said you have, God, I can't remember your exact verbiage, an almost pathological desire to imbue ambition in your work. Like where, I mean, at some point, like, how can you plumb much deeper than where you've already plumbed? I mean, you're like, I don't know how old you are, but you're like not an old dude. Like you've already gotten pretty much down to like the core of things. Like, how do you continue to find newer, deeper, more personal, more meaningful concepts to explore?
Yeah, well, this with I'm With You, as you mentioned, I just announced today. This is probably going to be the peak of that, at least for a little while, and barring significant tragedy or something like that, because this is it's touching on subject matter that's like as personal as it gets for me. My older brother passed away when I was 20, and this collection is an ode to him, a way of using AI and a specific technique I developed called single step diffusion to picture where he would be if he was still a part of my life. As far as I can reckon, that's as real as I'm going to get. I hope to have nothing more raw than that for a good while in my life. So yeah, that for me like stands out. Other projects of mine have had similar personal persuasions. I mean, Artist Bingo, obviously, like in some ways is, but it's also impersonal because it's rendering like the things from my life as these almost laughable archetypes that are like true of all artists' journeys. And I mean, catalog, very, very impersonal about like the anodyne aesthetics of mass consumer goods. Material, pretty personal. I'm literally wearing my heart on my sleeve my pants sleeve in this case, there is one of the pieces that has been added to the jeans is a heart formed of two entangled skulls. But that is like a lot of these really meaningful experiences and relationships that have happened in my life, like worn outwardly. But none of that was anything that like I hid away from people. I'm pretty open for the most part with people. Partially, I think because I just don't have all that much shame. Um, Partially because I don't know, I just love people and want to connect with them. And I think there's something about like undergoing significant trauma in life that can crack you open some. Sometimes it can totally close you off. It sort of depends how you heal from the whole matter. But with this, yeah, with this one thing in particular, with his passing, like it's not something I've really ever talked about. And so that at least with like this part of my life, you know, I have my family who I'm really close with and friends who I've been friends with since I was 3 years old, and you know they're basically family, and so they're all privy to all of this. And but I had never told any friends in the art world about any of this until this project. Art world, like none of my art world people, I didn't grow up around anyone involved in art, and so no one who's a part of this corner of my life existed for me prior to my entry into this realm. And so I'm revealing something totally new, and that I really don't like revealing. And it's basically only happening because I felt the idea in one of those lightning strikes came to me, and I felt like some sense of obligation to it. It felt too good to not do. And I sort of dissociated from how emotionally raw it would be as I started working on it. And then as I like kept doing so, I was like, oh, this means I'm gonna need to like tweet about this and like talk to people and go on podcasts. And yeah, that has been daunting. But it's also, I think, been like kind of healthy, and I don't want to say healing. I feel like I won't know like what the net impact of this is on my psyche until some months down the road probably, but it has like felt like good, and it's felt like it's opened me up some on the front of like sharing this part of my life with people. And yeah, a like really strong part of me like wants to hold back and like keep that private to myself. And it's like kind of accusatory and says that like any sharing of this is like a form of self-pity or trying to win over like others' sympathy. And I think that's like probably too harsh on myself. I don't think those are my motivations, and I think it's yeah, likely good for me to like allow myself to relax my grip on that thing I've kind of been hiding somewhat. And
I mean,
yeah, so,
it sounds like you have a conceptual work for yourself as the audience.
yeah, it's. I thought about it in those terms.
I will be curious. I'll be curious to see people's reaction to it. It's a rather different way. I hate to speak in such sterile terms, but it's a rather different way of inviting people to have a relationship with you and an art project than I think is traditionally seen within our realm. There's not a ton of like overt personalization of oneself. I mean, especially like crypto art is big on anonymity, and it's big on kind of like manicured identity. And to basically like blow the doors open on that and like not be able to hide anything not just of
Yeah.
like your face or your voice, but like your experiences in that way. Like I wonder, will people be enticed to come to know you more? Yeah,
Yeah. No, I actually am curious, like if it ends up being too personal and like collectors almost feel it's like too private to even collect that certainly is a possibility. Of course, it's like a small collection size and it has an intimate feel to it. But I don't know. I wonder if the subject matter just like may feel too heavy for people in the space, or if they connect
I don't
with it
know.
in some way.
I mean,
The hope is that people
yeah,
will see something, you know, maybe mirrored in their own lives in this. The images have this ambiguity to them that, like, hopefully, in addition to getting to know this person that I loved and love, they'll maybe also see flickers of someone who's an important part of their life, someone they see every day, someone they haven't seen in a long time. I'd love for that to happen as well. So
yeah.
if they can, come to know me better, great. If they can identify something in their own lives that then moves them personally, that would be wonderful as well.
Zach Yenger of Super Rare released a number of pieces honoring a sibling of his who had passed away some years ago. It was how I became familiar with his work as an artist. And I mean, I guess it's neither here nor there, but those are, I think, on the whole, some of the art that I've seen in this world that has affected me the most deeply, a number of them. So I think that there is
Yeah, no,
room
that's
here for
that's nice
for
to
the
hear. I'll
work.
need to look
Yeah,
at that.
yeah, it's remarkable. But again, the point is only to say that like I think it is true sometimes that we forget that there are like people on the other sides of these screens, and
Yeah,
like they can be reached and their spirits can be reached. And I mean, I wish you the best with this project. And you haven't released any of the aesthetics quite yet, right? I at least I'm
I've
not sure.
I've shown a few images in the run up, but yeah, I'm still finishing things up. So uh,
Cool.
yeah, not dropping the full set quite yet. That'll be sometime next week.
As we yeah, I mean, as we kind of wrap up here, do you want to tell everyone listening, like, you know, where to find you and where to keep up to date with the I'm with you, and you know when they might have more
Yeah,
information about it, things like that?
yeah, sure. I mean, so online, I'm mostly hanging on Twitter, as is probably the case for many of us. Uh, Kev underscore Esh, KEV underscore ESH is my handle. Feel free to come say hey, message me if you want to chat about anything discussed here today. I'm fairly active on there, so any notable updates can be found there. If you're off there, Kevin.Eshrick on Instagram. I'm guessing my name will be in the description for this so you can see the spelling there. I'm with you. We'll be releasing, it looks like Tuesday the 8th, with Tender on Verse. As of earlier today, it was the 7th, and then I received word that we're probably gonna move it to the 8th instead.
And by the time this
So yeah,
podcast airs, it might be the 9th.
yeah, we'll see. At this rate, noon Tuesday the 8th is when it's supposed to come out. I'll be sharing more updates in the coming days and week and a half, 2 weeks. So yeah, come check it out on Twitter if you'd like to see that. Feel free to message me.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, please check out Kevin and his art and his writing. I mean, once I learned of your existence, I pretty quickly fell into like the rabbit hole. Your work is really quite stunning, and I'm very conceptually interesting.
thanks.
And also, I just love anyone who writes things in crypto art, because there's like 15 of us
It's
left, and I'm
rare.
still working on finding the working on
Appreciate
building
it.
out my Rolodex. So Kevin, thank you very much
Yeah,
for being here. Thank you everyone for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please consider giving us a like or a follow or a subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get this podcast. Check out our Substack, Museum of Crypto at Substack. Nope. museumofcrypto.substack.com. Always get that wrong. Kevin, thanks so much for being here. My name's Max. That is Kevin to my right. And we'll be back next week with another, well, maybe we'll be back next week. We'll be back eventually with another MOCA Live podcast. So Kevin, take care. Everyone listening, take care.